This particular reservoir that we're looking at was actually put in over 100 years ago to supply water when the area was used as a military training area. And the reason for looking at it here now is to show that at this time of year, after very wet periods, it should be overflowing. One of the consequences of this is that the plants that should be abundant along that margin there have died, and there's very little recovery. And so our concern really is that if we have a drought period, the water table will go down, and that's the main thing that affects this particular type of area. That there are many of these plants, such as the coral ferns and the melaleuca across there, that rely on water being near the surface. The important thing is to be able to extrapolate as far as we can what is happening here, to recognise that this is an indication of what is happening right across the metropolitan area, where, and you can extend this right up around Melbourne if you like, that there is so little water going back into the natural water table, the natural underground water, because it's all going out in stormwater, that of course in a drought period then our problems are exacerbated, in the sense that our gardens will not be getting the water that they want, will be using more water, and so it comes back to the whole issue of water conservation and recognising that you've got to consider water in totality. Rainwater, groundwater, the whole lot has to be considered in terms of what the effect that we're having on it.
The climate's been pretty changeable here in Frankston, as it has been all over the world for the last few years. We see it in the Flora and Fauna Reserve in some really positive ways, in that some of the plantings we've done have grown tremendously at a rate that I wouldn't have ever expected. And then, yet, in some places in the reserve, when we were having drought, it was remarkable how resilient the reserve was, that our native Australian plants are used to having change. Whether or not we're going to be able to be that resilient if the change becomes more dramatic is a question really none of us can answer. So what we're doing now is planting a lot of plants in the reserve, so that hopefully if we get more dramatic droughts or more dramatic wet seasons, we'll have plenty of plants that will be able to survive either of those conditions. One of the things that isn't surviving very well is the southern brown bandicoot, which used to be plentiful in the Pines Flora and Fauna Reserve. That's an indigenous Australian mammal. What we're doing in the reserve is attempting to recreate some of the habitat that they need. They need a very specific kind of habitat because they need to be able to hide from predators. So they need very prickly kind of plants, lots of dense plants. The reason I'm committed to working in the pines, and I think the other volunteers feel the same way, is that we're preserving a piece of the Australian environment that we have so much to learn from. If you go into the pines on a day when it's 35 degrees, it's about 10 degrees cooler in there. It's not hotter to have the Australian environment left to grow and flourish. It actually creates a cooler environment in the summer. The animals that are in there, like the southern brown bandicoot, contribute tremendously to the health of the soil in there. There's a whole interconnected set of natural processes that are going on. The bandicoot eats fungi. It then digs in the soil looking for beetles and other fungi, and it has about 70 fungi species in its gut. And so as it defecates, it's then nourishing the soil. So this whole connection between the plants and the animals in the reserve is something that we need to learn from. We need to learn this closed loop that the Australian environment, as it used to exist and as it does in the Pines Flora and Fauna Reserve, is showing us that we can all varied mechanisms, varied organisms have an important part to play in keeping the environment stable. What we need to encourage, I think, is an understanding and an aesthetic about how beautiful Australian plants are. I think we're going to see that no matter how pretty some of the European plants are, if we hit major droughts or major floods, I don't think they're going to survive as well in this environment. So we're really a lot smarter to stick with the indigenous plants.
Of course, we're building up the soils to hold a lot more moisture. We're constantly adding organic matter in here. You see these two gigantic tanks over there. That's our water storage. So we obviously realise that water's an important thing here. We've all experienced prolonged droughts, and gardens die in droughts. Heaps of great ideas out there for wicking garden beds. You know, there's other ideas where you can put porous clay pots into the ground and the water can slowly seep out like that. Submerged or irrigation systems below the surface of the soil are all really great ideas that will save water. At the moment we're in our first season of gardening and we're only just sort of experiencing the effects of climate change, and these are extreme methods that you need to use. Like, people in the desert use these sorts of methods to irrigate their crops, and at the moment I think we still think we live down the south and we have a lot of water around, which is true, but as these extreme weather events become more and more frequent, I think people are going to go, well, you know what, it is a lot of effort to put an irrigation system under the surface of the soil, but we're dealing with an extreme weather situation, so we need an extreme response to that. And I think we'll start seeing in the garden a lot more of these more novel, creative ideas for maintaining moisture in the soil while the weather gets more extreme. You know, we need to step up our efforts as well.